described the problem in the security industry, actually, Dave. Everybody's worrying about sort of AI and securing AI at the moment when the back door is wide open because they're not doing the kind of basics.
Welcome to Cloud Realities, a conversation show exploring the practical and exciting alternate realities that can be unleashed through cloud-driven transformation. I'm Dave Chapman.
I'm Sjoukje.
And I'm Rob Kernahan.
And this week we're going to be talking about the ever-important conversation that goes on around the world of cyber. It's got more and more complex over the last few years, but maybe the basics are still the important thing that we need to focus on. So this week we're going to talk about the conversation that boards are having around cyber and maybe some suggestions on a wider conversation that they could have if they're not already having it. But before we get to that, I was walking into the office the other day and Rob was just finishing a human beatbox heavy version of Hark the Herald Angels Sing in the foyer, caroling away, and he was waving madly trying to get my attention, and I was walking past trying not to make eye contact with him, but eventually he managed to drag me over. And of course I was like, Rob, what's confusing you this week?
I must say, Dave, you've raised the bar with that one. Well done.
Thanks, mate.
Well, as I was singing, I was confused about Bluetooth and where it's going to go next. I'll tell you why. It's almost 30 years old, Bluetooth. 1994 it got created, so it's been going for a long old time, right?
Right.
It's still one of the most frustrating and unreliable things you have to suffer in your life, okay? So, and also, you see Apple and Samsung and Google putting proprietary logic into their Bluetooth system. So if you buy their phone and get their Bluetooth earbuds, they pair really well. However, if you try and cross-pair them, it all goes horribly wrong. And we've lived with Bluetooth for far too long, right? So I'm confused about what's going to happen next. So we've seen proprietary divergence when normally you want convergence of that. And it remains, one earbud connected but not the other, or it's not connecting, turn it off and on again. This 30 years we've been doing this and it's not got better. 30 years!
Long. Yeah.
I mean, maybe I've underthought this important subject that you raised this morning, but
Bluetooth seems, human nation.
It seems to work okay for me. I mean, maybe though, Rob, maybe the issue is I've chosen a closed mobile system to use, which just works, and you've maybe gone for an open, slightly a buggier system that maybe doesn't just work every time.
If you get into the Android, Apple, iPhone type debate, David, I'm going to just, no, don't do it. Don't. But it is. We've been going, I checked it, 1999, the first time Bluetooth headphones came out. Oh. 24 years later, they still don't work properly. And I'm like, what next?
Is it even secure?
I know. I don't even get started on that. But yeah, it's like this panacea. When it came, it launched, massive fanfare. This is going to, revolutionize your tech experience. 30 years later, I'm still swearing at Bluetooth headsets.
This is one like normally when you do your confusion subject.
This is more rage. I'm more more frustrated.
This is man shouts at the sky stuff. I reckon. Like Bluetooth works pretty well. That's where I'm going with this. I mean, yes, there's the odd little quirk. Sometimes when you get a rent-a-car and you're trying to connect your phone to play music, that can be a little bit of a mess about. But that's generally because of the interface in the car.
Hang on. You actually materially failed to be able to connect to your phone in Vegas, so that's a perfect example of where that's a Bluetooth fail.
I would say that was more the car's interface than and my ability to work it.
Blame everything else other than your Apple ecosystem. Well done, you.
Well, let's leave it there, shall we? I'm not sure we're ever going to resolve that one because I think most of the world think Bluetooth's broadly all right. I think you should go back to your caroling, Rob.
Probably a good idea.
So look, let's move on to today's major subject then. Joining us this week, I'm delighted to say, is Simon Hodgkinson, the former CISO at BP and now strategic advisor to a number of boards, and also old friend of mine. We worked together back in the days of BP. Simon, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Really appreciate the invite, actually. Looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, so 38 years now in technology. Been doing cyber and cybersecurity predominantly for the last 8 to 10 years. And prior to that, worked for various different industries, including software and financial services before joining oil and gas.
Right. So, Simon, why don't we start by just getting a sense of your history? Like, tell us where you started off in your career and then how you ended up in the world of the CISO.
Yeah, perfect. So interestingly enough, I do talks for schools, trying to encourage people into sort of STEM careers and what have you. And I always start by saying I started my career in the cloud.
Right.
And that was in 1985, because what we were doing was selling compute on mainframes to other companies, and it was just like exactly like the cloud is today. So I started out on mainframes. I used to be the guy that was trying to debug programs on punch cards. I know I don't look that old, but I am.
Was this in the late 60s, maybe 68, 69? I'm sort of envisaging, like those old videos of like the moon launch and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Did you wear a white coat with pens in the top?
No,
your punch cards.
No, we didn't have to. But punch cards was a thing, and you'd get like 1,000 punch cards and put them through the processor, and one would be wrong, and you'd then have to try and debug, and actually like get a little clipper and amend it and get a little sticky tape to put over the holes that were wrong.
Did you ever witness massive comedy moment in computing when the punch cards go in the air and all fall out of order? That's just like the ultimate what moment.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing I say to them is actually, I showed them a picture of the computer room. It actually wasn't our computer room, but it was a very similar one. And, say that, your phone has got 18,000 times the compute power that entire room had in it, which was like the size of a football pitch. I started back then, Dave, and it was in the very early days of open systems. So we had this they had this box turn up into in the computer room, and everyone looked at it, and I thought, well, let's just open it up and have a play. And it was Unix, and it was BSD 4.2 Unix in the really early days. So I got into Unix then, and into early versions of relational database. So Ingress, for, if people can remember the name Ingress. And I joined Ingress in early 90s and got into big time into relational databases. That sounds quite sad, actually. But yeah.
Dinner party conversation 101. Let's talk about ACID principles.
And then I moved to Sybase. Went on from Sybase to Lehman Brothers and worked for Lehman for 4 years doing database and Unix, and got into leading a team at that point. In 2000, I got tempted out of Lehman, probably a good thing in the long run.
Yeah.
But got tempted out.
The bullet there.
Exactly, to do a .com, and we built a fixed income electronic brokerage platform, and it was a really elegant solution in very early days of Java and that. So it was a really lovely solution. The trouble was nobody wanted it.
Was it ahead of its time?
Well, it was. So fixed income brokers always did their deals over several bottles of wine and a really expensive lunch. What they didn't want was the electronic
was that
trading
to be automated?
Platform. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we kind of got that a little bit wrong. And the financial markets in 2002 were horrible. So shut that down. And then I joined BP. And I always remember when it was an old boss of mine encouraged me to go over. And I said, I don't want to go to an oil and gas company. It's like dirty industry. I've been in tech. I've been in financial services, done a .com. Failed, by the way, but I've done a .com. And he said, no, come on and have a look. And I didn't realize BP at that point had the largest commodities trading function in the world. So it was just like walking in to an investment bank, except that they hadn't invested much in technology at that point. So they wanted somebody to come in and run infrastructure for them, build their first data center, which was you will lovingly remember as a Southeast Hall in Global Switch.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I had 9 jobs at BP, and the last 2 I ran global infrastructure and ops. We called it INIS then. And then when Daniel Barriuso, who was the CISO, great guy, resigned, I kind of had almost a sort of guttural reaction to, I want to do that job. So I went and asked if I could do the job on the expectation I would take it on as well as doing the infrastructure role. And they said, well, no, you can go for it, but you'd have to give up the infrastructure role. So I went down the CISO route and absolutely loved it for 4 years, but it's exhausting.
Well, and that maybe brings us on to over that same time period, perhaps, like the evolution of cyber itself. Like I was actually, and I'm not sure we ever talked about this in the past, I was a CISO for BAT back in the early 2000s, like 2001, 2002 sort of period of time. And at the time, I was double tracking that role with a head of infrastructure role. And it was very perimeterized, and we spent a lot of time working with group security. And we thought about it in kind of much more controlled and physical terms. And I think it's fair to say over the course of the last 20 years, your ability to manage IT security in that way has completely vanished, right?
You got when cloud didn't exist, everything could be in a walled garden estate, and you could always a lot of people focused on the perimeter. We've learnt that perimeter defenses aren't always the best. They're a good thing in your bailiwick, but that whole big walled garden getting smashed open by cloud completely changed it all, didn't it? So you used to be able to put your arms around it, touch it, feel it, see it. Excellent. I can quantify the problem easily versus the new world, which is compute is everywhere and highly distributed. How do you manage that then? Your edge and everything else has made the problem dramatically worse, or harder, I should say.
I agree with you. And I think, like most things in life, it's a people problem as well. So if you go back to those early days when you were a CISO, Dave, actually, there was a lot of control points in the system. And actually, the volume of change in IT was dramatically lower. Dramatically lower. So you could actually be involved and put sort of human controls around things. Now the sort of pace of delivery is so quick that model no longer works. You can't have somebody at the end of a project with a checklist going, oh, hang on, you haven't done this, or you've got this medium vulnerability that we're saying you can't go live with. That those days are gone. Yet there's still a lot of people in the industry and a lot of companies that are still making money off that kind of old school security model. Yeah. So I think that one of the biggest changes, there's a technology change, but it's also just the way everybody does digital now. I mean, it's, everybody does, right?
In your mind, if the old model is this perimeter controlled checkpoint at the end framework for security, how are you conceptualizing what the current environment looks like in terms of, if you're a CISO today, how would you be envisaging how you would get your arms around what's going on?
So a couple of things. I think first you have to completely change the thought process to we use the whole castle and moat. That terminology is used quite a lot about the old world, but actually now it's about identity and data. So that's what you've got to protect ultimately is the identity and data. And so, people talk about zero trust, and too many people talk about zero trust being a product. It's not, it's a design principle. But at the very heart of zero trust, you can have all the segmentation you want in the world, but if you have got no integrity or availability of your identity, nothing works. So I think you've got to really focus on those things that are really important to protecting those core assets, which is like I said, identity and protecting the data. I also think that automation is absolutely critical. So now if you think about those old waterfall days when people would run a project and you get security to come in at the end and do their bits and bobs, and then tell you couldn't go live, and then you'd have an argument, and then somebody would make a sensible decision or a pragmatic decision on when you could go live if you did X, Y, and Z. You're doing drops multiple times a day now, so that has got to be completely instrumented through the software delivery lifecycle. Completely instrumented, and having control points in that along the way. And part of that is also embedding security in everything that you do as a business, everything that you do as a business. So it's not this thing that sits on the side ticking boxes. It's embedded in the decision making on mergers and acquisitions, the decision making on things like new country entry. Your developers become security experts as well. So you embed, knowledge and capability in the development community, because frankly, there's not enough security people now to add to every single product that you're delivering. So you've got to find ways of embedding security in every aspect of the business, in my view.
And what's your view on the scale of the risk change as well? So hacking continues to grow. You heard yesterday nation states calling out other nation states for saying, you're hacking us, stop, we know what you're doing type thing. There's this ever increasing threat. It seems to be more pervasive everywhere. Everybody's having a go. That appears to have piled on a lot of pressure as well. Never have we ever been so intensely thinking about securing our systems and the dodgy actors out there trying to get control of the data?
Yeah, I think that the attack surface just grows. I mean, it grows because digital world is getting bigger, right? I mean, it's like, what business do you know can survive without their technology platforms for a month? It's just beyond comprehension. That will be the end of most businesses, as we know. No BCP plans, in my view, can last for a month without the digital platforms that underpin them. So I think companies need to really reflect on the sort of geopolitical challenges that you brought up there, Rob. And I know I'll give you an example, when there were trade sanctions turned up in the Middle East, guess what? The attacks increased. And the attacks often come from proxies for government that are criminal gangs, but they're frankly funded by the state. I think everybody would say that's true of things like Russia. If nothing else, they're prepared to harbour those people in there. So I think that that's an example where why do you see that increase? Well, frankly, if you cut off the flow of money through one route, guess what? They're going to go to the criminal world to try and fund those economies. And so you can see there's that sort of state and criminal sort of activity that's driven by the whole geopolitical world. I think the other thing that's occurring as well is there is more nation state activity because you can hide behind it.
Yeah.
And nation state activity, you've seen some recently. I mean, the attack on the power stations in Ukraine, for instance. I mean, is that an act of war? I mean, there's no Geneva Convention for cyber. Right. There is in the physical world, but there isn't for cyber. But actually, one might argue an attack on critical national infrastructure is a war. Is a trigger for a kinetic effect.
The one I always remember was Stuxnet in the enrichment facilities, incredibly sophisticated, took offline enrichment very effectively and destroyed some very complicated engineering, and they didn't really recover properly. But that was an example of one nation state going at another to take something that they didn't like, the other nation found extremely critical, and was progressing a very intense geopolitical conversation about nuclear.
Yeah, absolutely. Stuxnet. There's a great book on Stuxnet as well. It's a really fascinating case, and it just shows that that was a brilliant piece of malicious software. I mean, you've got to take your hat off to the people that wrote that.
Whoever did it was very talented. Yes, very talented.
Take your black hat off, you mean?
They didn't destroy it. That was the interesting thing, is they didn't destroy it. What they wanted to do is just slow down the centrifuges. So actually, it reduced the pace at which they could enrich. So and actually, if things just shut down, people will do a root cause analysis and try and figure out what it was. But actually, it's much smarter to do things over a long time at a slow pace.
Well, isn't there also another pernicious attack surface, particularly with things like Gen AI, which is in the data itself? Exactly the same philosophy, which is just slightly tweak the data to drive the decision making just mildly off course. It doesn't have to be radically off course, does it?
No, and it's interesting, those models, as you train the data. It was that classic example. Is it Microsoft released something they released it initially somewhere in the Far East, and the model worked really well, and then they released it in the Americas, and people deliberately poisoned it with
Let the
bias.
world burn. Yeah. It's like, how can we corrupt this? There's somebody always having a go, isn't there?
Yeah, and it became racist at that point. But it wasn't because culturally people didn't do that in one area. In the US, it did, and this model became racist in the end. And it's just like so there was a very early days example of how you can manipulate the data to change the outcomes.
So it sounds like there's a number of different things that are changing the game here very radically, and it's accelerating. So obviously you've got the increasing sophistication and volume of attack. You have got a radically different technology landscape with kind of wholly automated processes being built into it that's changing the game in terms of the day-to-day security process. And then you've got the ever-increasing reliance of organizations on technology. To your point, most organizations could not withstand these days extended periods of being cut off from their technology. So radically different set of dynamics. Tell us a little bit then about the day-to-day change in the CISO role itself. So when I did my role, I reported to the CIO. The CISO conversation and the security conversation was almost like an AOB on the ITLT conversation. And, it was like, security is all good then, Dave? We're like, yep, we're all good. We've just patched. We've patched again. It's all fine. Thanks very much, lads. Quite a different conversation today, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. And there's just a couple of other areas just to sort of flesh out the totality of it. Before I get into that question, Dave, I mean, sort of the whole geopolitical situation that Rob and I were just talking about, actually manifests itself in regulatory changes as well. So if you look at the world in the early 2000s was all about creating this massive global economy with no boundaries. Yeah. Today, it's all balkanization. It's all countries declaring sort of an isolationism position on, you can only store our data in our country. And that's making the digital world that much more difficult, and the CISO job that much more difficult as well. And the final bit is the operational technology. People often forget about the fact that all of your rigs, your refineries, your manufacturing plants, they're all run by technology. And there's this almost this cultural divide between the engineering community and the cyber community, and they need to come together to secure those critical assets. And the reason I link that into the geopolitics side is because very recently there's been a number of breaches of water treatment plants. Now, if you want to create civil unrest in a country, the thing to go after is drinking
water.
So you've got to be thinking about all aspects from a security perspective as well. And the final bit then would be actually this notion of, like, we talk about physical and logical security. The two things are interlinked with things like insider threat as well, and with terrorism and what have you. So the role of the CISO is so broad. So that I've been out the corporate role now for 3 years at the end of December, which is remarkable. But I do have the privilege of working with some brilliant people in the security industry still, and the conversations that happen now are so broad. So, like I said, everything from sitting around the CEO's table talking about mergers and acquisitions to new country entry. You've got to be really thoughtful about the security implications based on the geopolitical situation of going into new countries. So you're talking about talking at very high level business strategy. You've got to understand regulatory implications of the different environments you're going in, or from a, say, China perspective. I mean, China's still a massive growth opportunity for most organizations, but you've got to be really thoughtful about how you position yourself from a cyber perspective as you go into that country. So that's really interesting. Then you get all the way down to, actually, have you patched everything? Right. Microsoft, we've just seen that.
Upgrade.
Yeah. And you'll be going in, and so the role of CISO now is just so broad. And I think that's where again, this is where technology can really help by just kind of assimilating all of this data that you've got across the organization and producing meaningful insights into what you need to go after next, which is the next mold you've got to kind of whack.
Is the role now, has it evolved to routinely be at least a organizational leadership team or CEO report role, or are you still seeing it being sort of typically being a CIO report role?
Unfortunately, I think there's never a simple answer to this, but I mean, most of the time it's still into the technology function. I see, one of my leaving gifts at BP was to get it raised as a peer of the CDO, the chief digital officers, and the CIOs, etc., because I think it should be at that level.
Yeah.
What I do see, however, is a lot of the people that certainly in the bigger FTSE 100 or S&P, top S&P and what have you, the CISO gets a direct line to the CFO, CEO, and the board. There's most organizations don't, the CIO doesn't put himself in the middle of that. And I was blessed at BP that, I had a direct line into the CFO. I had a direct line into the CEO and the board. And it was never, even though I reported to the CIO at that point, it never got in the way. So I think there's that human behavior thing.
Yeah,
and there's also the positive side of being part of the CIO organization is you get to see everything that's happening from a digital perspective. Maybe you get less visibility from the business side. And I think the CISO role is more about kind of business and operational risk now than just a technology role. I think it's much broader than just technology.
You can't disconnect it, can you? Business, you got the merger of IT and OT, and I absolutely agree with the engineering thought pattern around OT is very different from a security perspective to IT. So you got that merger and coming together, and then you've got the business inextricably linked to technology. Your business is technology. Get over that. And so all the factors that affect all those three things come together in one big melee in the middle, isn't it? So you've got this increased complexity, and then you've got to apply technology to the problem. Otherwise, you're just going to top out, aren't you, with just too much to deal with?
Yeah, and that situation reporting, that almost real time situation reporting is so important now. I mean, I don't know a single person. Well, I certainly could never have put my hand on my heart and say we've got everything landed in BP, and I don't think there's a CISO in the world that could say at any point in time have they patched every vulnerability that's out there. Are there any internet-facing assets that they don't know about? Do they know everything that's going on in their organization? With the democratization of digital now, I think that's almost nigh on impossible. You're always going to be behind the curve.
Yeah, it also sounds like a very huge responsibility, this role.
It is a huge responsibility, and it kind of comes into the issues that have come up recently around the Joe Sullivans of the world. So Joe was the CISO at Uber and was indicted and convicted, actually, of allegedly, I guess it's not allegedly given he was convicted, but of actually, covering up a data breach. But what was interesting there was the CEO not indicted at all. And yet, as all the reports I've read, whether they're accurate or not, you kind of have to take everything with a pinch of salt. But everything I've read suggests that the CEO knew what was going on. So on top of that broad church of accountabilities, you've now got the regulators stepping in and taking criminal cases. You then had Timothy Brown from SolarWinds at the end of October, again indicted. And what's really interesting about Timothy Brown's is they've gone back to say that, frankly, he wasn't doing enough about, he was overstating the security position of the company, misrepresenting their ability to deal with cyber attacks. And that's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, failing to apply adequate security controls.
Was that misrepresenting the security stance of an organization to, say, investors, and therefore is that what the situation was?
That's
I mean, that's an amazing microcosm example of the magnitude of change of accountability around the CISO, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it makes the job pretty concerning if you were a CISO now. People talk about, you've got to have directors and officers insurance, and it's like, great, but that doesn't protect you from criminal liability.
Right.
That will cover your legal expenses, but frankly, I would be less worried about my legal expenses than being banged up in a prison for getting something wrong.
Yeah.
So there's that thing though, which they do with pilots in the airline industry, that if you declare something in time in the right way after it's happened, the pilot's protected as long as they haven't had gross misconduct. And what that's allowed to do is the aviation industry has become open and transparent. So it's an open solution, and they constantly improve off the back of those learnings, as opposed to closed systems, which is where, medical's a good example where things might be covered up in that industry. There's good cases of that. And a different approach to how the CISO role can be discharged legally, because who's going to want to do the job if you're sat on top of an organization you may not have complete control over, a lot of politics in play, you may not have the funding that you need, and yet you can go to jail for something your organization does. So it's like maybe there's a regulatory and legislative position that needs to change to allow the CISO to be able to discharge the role, but as long as they do the right thing, they are protected.
Imagine that as an interview question. If you're interviewing for a job as CISO, you'd be like, how would you deal with that situation?
Rob, I couldn't agree with you more. I was on a panel with and this guy who was an ex-district attorney from New York, and we get on really well, but we disagree on the whole role of the regulator. And I always use the analogy of the airline industry. The only reason safety performance improved in the airline industry is they created an open, transparent reporting environment, not just within their own companies, but shared that across all the airline industries. So everybody learns. And oil and gas was exactly the same. I mean, really sadly, we used to kill loads of people in the oil and gas industry decades ago. But actually adopting that, it's called black box thinking, right? Adopting that sort of mentality of, encouraging people to speak up when there's near misses. You want people to say, oh, God, blimey, maybe I shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. Let's report that just in case. And that model seems to me a lot better if the regulators could incentivize people to report and then share those learnings across the industry. We would collectively become better. But I think that these recent cases, and let's be honest, security CISOs don't sit in an island, right? They sit in an organization, and the tone of that organization comes from the CEO, shadow of leadership and all of that. So you might be a CISO who wants to report something, but actually the organization dynamics says, no, cover it up. God forbid any gets put in that situation, but I know people who will, as a result of just the company cultures that you see. But I think if the regulators were really encouraging people to report and celebrating the fact that people had issues, but they were open and transparent and shared those learnings, that would drive a much healthier culture in cyber. It's like you don't train a dog by kicking it, do you? You train a dog by rewarding it.
Well, let's continue that thread actually and talk about the board conversation. So in your view at the moment, and maybe we do this to let's pull a few threads together and bring today's conversation to a bit of a head, is what do you perceive the board conversation is at the moment in most organizations? And then, of course, really what should it be?
So I think the larger organizations and things like financial services and critical, more of the CN. Well, that's not true actually, but some of the bigger providers in CNI, I think there's a fairly robust conversation that happens at the top level. I think people have to remember that the board is there to help manage risk. It's not there to do the job. So I would say over my tenure as CISO, the maturity of the conversation at the board dramatically improved as their understanding that cyber wasn't special. Cyber is just another operational risk. It's just a trigger for a business impacting event. So they're as capable of managing the conversation around cyber risk as they are about any other operational risk. And so that encouraged them to start asking the right questions, and the right questions, about are we doing enough around things like mergers and acquisitions, and what lessons have we learned from that situation, alongside the usual, how are we doing around getting the foundations right? A lot of people talk about getting the basics right. Nothing is basic in cyber. So getting those foundational controls in place and operating, and that's where you've got to have kind of real-time information. And I see so many people patting themselves on the back that, we're great at patching 95% of our estate. And it's like, okay, what about the 5% that's vulnerable? Because that's not good. So having that data to hand that says, actually my controls are implemented and they are effective, and being able to report that up to the board is really important. And also then to take them on that journey of maturity, because frankly, you have to justify investment to stand still. That's a really difficult conversation to be able to say, you've got to give me X amount of $1 million. What do I get back for it? Well, just about the same you got today. And it's tough, right? But therefore you've got to kind of take them on that journey of why that is an important investment to maintain the security posture. The other thing I'd say as well is they need to be involved in agreeing the risk appetite. So what is the right risk appetite for the company? A bit like market or credit risk or liquidity risk, which they would happily step into. They need to be immersed in what is the right cybersecurity posture we need for our company. Because frankly, most people, in fact, nobody needs a CMM level 5 in cybersecurity. Maybe that's one way of actually getting into that conversation, is your maturity against things like NIST or your framework of choice, of which there are a ludicrous amount you can choose from. But actually get them into that journey about where do you want to be in terms of this risk to the company in a way that they can normalize it against other risks the companies are engaging with.
Sjoukje, what have you been looking at this week?
So each week I do some research on related ideas in transformation and tech, and this week I thought we should take a look at the biggest cybersecurity trends for 2024. So by the end of 2024, the cost of cyber attacks on the global economy is expected to exceed $10.5 trillion, which highlights the need for cybersecurity as a strategic priority. So what are then the biggest threats? AI will play a huge role in both attack and defense strategies. Also, the shortage of skilled security professionals continues to be a big challenge. But also the rise of generative AI in cyber attacks, vulnerability of IT devices. Also, the integration of cybersecurity in boardrooms is going to be a big focus point next year. And lastly, the emergence of cybersecurity regulations. So I have a question for you. What do you think will be the biggest trend for next year?
So all of that. No, it's
all of the above. Panic.
And that trillion number sounded scary.
Yeah, 10 trillion. Yeah. That should wake somebody up and go, it's costing us a bit.
Yeah.
I'm probably just so old and tired in this world now. But my view is, yes, all of that. But actually what's still missing is good foundational hygiene. The attackers they're lazy. It's a bit like a physical burglar. If they walk around your estate and they see a alarm box on the front of your house, whether there's an alarm in it or not, the chances are they're going to go next door. Or if there's a door open, they're going to go through that. Most cyber criminals are lazy. They'll fire and forget, and hopefully they'll breach somebody, and then, through their business model in the dark web, give that access to sell that access to somebody else, you'll take advantage of it, deploy ransomware. It's the basic foundations, the foundational hygiene that people keep forgetting. They talk about generative AI, and yes, it's going to enhance the capability of the attackers, but it's also going to enhance the capability of the defenders. But the reality is, credential theft is at the heart of 9 out of 10 breaches still. So, phishing attacks will get better as a result of things like Gen AI. You're going to get more and more deep fakes and things like that. That's a way. But at the end of the day, what they're going to try and do is get hold of credentials and use those credentials to do what they've always done, which is to sit there, do some reconnaissance, laterally move, escalate privileges, get control of your domain, and then extort money from you. Really amusingly, I've got to bring this up because I found this was quite ironic. So we talked about, ransomware was the first level extortion. The second level was actually because people are not paying ransomware anymore necessarily, or paying ransoms necessarily, let's exfiltrate data and then try extort money on 2 dimensions, so double extortion. Now there's triple. The third one is they actually report you to the SEC.
They dob you in. I love it. They dob you in, you get arrested.
So there's now a threat to dob you into the regulator because they obviously know you've been breached, and
that's like the snake's eating its tail.
They have inside information.
So without wishing to be flippant, I think all of that you've said is true, but actually what the security community and the whole, well, it's not just the security community, the business community and the security community just need to get those foundations in place and operating effectively.
Do you think there's a risk that the board will chase the shiny thing, so get all entrenched in the conversation about Gen AI security and forget the stuff you just said, which is, the threat's actually over there, mainly, that bit, it's important, but this one's the thing you need to think about?
Well, so I think yes, but I think the CISO's job now, especially, and the good thing about the not for Joe clearly and Tim, but the good thing about those things is, I think the response from the CISOs to that environment now has to be ultra transparent with the executive team and the board. So if there is issues in your environment, you've got to actually report them up. So through that kind of board reporting, you've got to put everything out there. And most organizations, have got massive technical debt, so they can't patch a lot of that stuff. They've got to start reporting that up to the board about the state of those foundational controls that you need to have to protect you against 90% of attacks.
Good business case in going to the cloud, I'd say, Simon. What do you
Well, yeah, interesting though, Dave. People are pulling back a little bit now as well. We could have another debate on that one.
That's a whole other podcast for another day.
Yeah. But I think that so the CISO's got to pull that conversation back on track, which is, we can worry about all that stuff, but actually we just got to get this foundational stuff sorted.
In my view, we should create a new law that if the CISO does get arrested, the CEO has to share the cell with them.
Yeah.
that might change the conversation dynamic.
You should be in regulation, Rob, with that kind of lack.
Yeah.
On that note, then, let's wrap up today's conversation. So, Simon, thanks so much for your time and insight. What an important subject, and, still some ways to go, I think, in the whole discipline. But we end every episode of this podcast by asking our guest what they're excited about doing next. And that could be going out to look at the Christmas lights this weekend, or it could be something exciting in your professional life. So, Simon, what are you excited about doing next?
I'm excited about getting some sun, Dave. Some winter sun. So not till sort of mid-January, but it's already on the kind of horizon now. So looking forward to Christmas, but frankly, it's been so bloody miserable in the weather in this country, albeit the sun's out this morning. I just want some sun, some
vitamin D, bit of vitamin D injection.
Absolutely.
Where are you heading to?
We're going to Lanzarote,
nice.
to a nice sporting hotel. So get lots of activity done as well.
Well, look, enjoy that and have a lovely Christmas in the meantime.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for the invite and love the conversation.
So a huge thanks to our guest this week, Simon. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks also to our sound and editing wizards, Ben and Louis, our absent producer, Marcel, and of course to all of our listeners. We're on LinkedIn and X, Dave Chapman, Rob Kernahan, and Sjoukje. Feel free to follow or connect with us, and please get in touch if you have any comments or ideas for the show. And of course, if you haven't already done that, rate and subscribe to our podcast. See you in another reality next week.